We have here Chantal Cipriano, who she's leading the series about the Canadian industry updates. So I think you are going to be the person they will be talking about in the next session.
I was just kidding, as I said, for the record. I was kidding. I have a huge respect for Canada and the state of Ontario. Every time the Czech Republic plays Canada in hockey.
The province.
Chantal, good to see you. And Rich Roberts, long time. Bye, guys.
Have fun. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Take care. Good luck. Have a great panel, guys. Bye, Zoltan.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think this was the introduction for the next session. Chantal, you have some great panelists here today. There were a lot of people fighting to get into this panel discussion. So you can take it from here. Rich, it's nice to see you again. Charmaine as well.
Thanks, Zoltan. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces as well as new faces on the panel today, and looking forward to discussing all things gaming in Canada. For those who don't know me, I'm Chantal Cipriano. I'm the VP of Legal Compliance and People with PointsBet Canada. And this is a recurring quarterly panel that I host with Gaming Americas. Our speakers today, we have a casino operator, a platform provider, and a payment processor who each bring a different perspective to the Canadian market. And without further ado, I'll turn it over to our three panelists to introduce themselves. Rich Roberts of Mohegan, Charmaine Hogan of Playtech, and Shruti Joshi of Paramount Commerce. So I'll start with you, Rich, if you could give us a brief intro on your background in the industry.
Sure. I'm Rich Roberts. I'm president of Mohegan Digital. We just launched Connecticut about 90 days ago, and looking forward to this launch in Ontario, hopefully in the next 90 days. We will find out during this panel how close we are. I go back to launching Mohegan and Resorts about 8 years ago in New Jersey as part of Sport Tech. So I've been part of the industry for, well, since pretty much the beginning, and look forward to the discussion today.
Thank you. Charmaine?
Yes, hi, thank you, and good afternoon to you all. Good evening at this end. Where do I start? Yeah, I kind of landed, if you like, into gambling quite a few years ago because I am half Maltese. I'm brought up in Malta, so at the time, again, Rich, going back myself way back, Malta had started launching regulations, licensing for online gambling, if you like. And I was working in Brussels for quite a few years, so part of the whole European Union at a time when many of those European markets were looking at what is happening online, what is what is this license, what are these services, what is this entertainment, call it what you like. And that is when the eyes of the European Commission then started to sort of say, okay, we need to see what's happening out there, what are the rules, what are the policies in place, are they compliant with EU law? You have 28 member states at the time. Now I'm based in the UK, and I've been with Playtech for 3-4 years now. I'm head of regulatory affairs, so looking at markets globally, if you like. Those markets we call upcoming or new and emerging markets, but also re-regulating markets or those that are revisiting their regulations. So keeping us quite busy.
Thanks, Charmaine. Shruti?
Hi, everyone. My name is Shruti Joshi. I am legal counsel at Paramount Commerce, which is a company that offers payment solutions to iGaming merchants. Fairly new to the industry relative to the rest of the panel here. I've been at Paramount Commerce for about 1.5 years, but also very much looking forward to the regulated Ontario market.
Thanks. It's probably predictable that our first topic of the day will relate to Ontario. With the opening of Ontario's iGaming and sports betting market, the expectations have been quite high. I think consumers are excited and are eagerly awaiting for the arrival of operators, and operators, I can attest, have been extremely busy with launch plans. We've been discussing iGaming in Ontario for some time now, and every day we're hopeful that there will be progress on an updated launch date, which was originally slated to be in December of 2021, but the province has decided to push that back a date yet to be determined. So Rich and Charmaine, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on what you're most looking forward to as we get closer to the launch in Ontario. Rich, I'll start with you.
Getting through all the paperwork. First, we know when we launch, we're there. I think it's really about, it's a new market, particularly, well, it's not really a new market. It's been a great market for a long time. And I think, entering a market that's already established, I think in terms of the populace knowing that, what online gaming is, in comparison to Connecticut, there's been a lot of awareness marketing that's had to happen, right? It's a small state, and you would think that, oh, this law was passed, everybody knows about it. No, that's not really the case. So I think in Ontario, I think what we've got is, from a Mohegan perspective, with Fallsview, which is the leading casino operator in the province, is really bringing that experience of Fallsview to a digital platform, and engaging our customers beyond just the retail experience.
Charmaine?
Yeah, it could be a very straightforward answer. It's like, oh, we're looking forward to having a launch date. That's what most of us want. But no, I mean, I agree. I think it's a great opportunity. It's a fantastic market. It's a large market. And as we all know, when a market opens up, and it does open up sensibly, and Ontario has been doing a lot of groundwork, in my view, all key players benefit, whether it's the players, whether it's the industry which invests in that market and wants to recoup that investment, or whether it's the state, which is, of course, after getting its due revenue. But yeah, I mean, joking aside, the date is important, because we're not saying give us a date for launch next week or the week after, or even the end of February, to be honest. You just want a date to be able to work towards. I think many of us are, working on multiple projects, as many markets are looking to regulate online. They all set timeframes, and everybody is, I dare say, scrambling to meet those requirements and meet them on time. And a short delay is one thing, but when it's a long delay, it's ultimately not even beneficial to the state, because there's so many things that can go wrong. And also, I think the industry, whether an operator or a supplier, some other project might kick up and get priority elsewhere. Regardless how large you are, you only have so many resources at hand, and they need to be able to prioritize, and they come to you, give me a date. I'm like, we're checking, we're working on it. There's no date yet. We hope it's coming. And also, I think what you said, the paperwork, but having all the necessary information in hand to be able to have your internal discussions and say, like, okay, we know what we need to do, let's continue cracking on. And right now there are some bits and pieces still missing. And no new market is perfect or straightforward upon launch. That granted, but at least if you have a date to say, like, okay, we know where we're heading. And again, as Playtech, we have a big focus on regulated markets, and we welcome those opportunities. And I think in Ontario, they've done a great job. They do have high standards. As you said, it's not kind of a new market per se. And we welcome that aspiration to high standards. You want to be competing with like-minded on the market, onshore. I think one possibility I would add is when it comes to products per se, fine, not everybody gets it right day one, no market gets it right day one, but don't outright perhaps prohibit, allow for new products to come to market eventually, if not day one. Be open to that, and be open to new products and new variants as you go along. That would be another aspiration, I would say.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You both have experience operating in different jurisdictions. And aside from not having a launch date, which is obviously a huge issue, whether it's from a technology resource, and the list goes on and on, perspective, what other hurdles have you seen that are associated with this new market launches compared to other jurisdictions in which you operate? And how can we lessen those hurdles at all, whether from consumer, regulatory, platform, or other related perspective? Rich, I'll start with you.
As a retail operator, the way that those have been set up with the OLG is different than with IGO for digital operators. So, when you look at how the retail operations have to perform, and then what we have to do from a digital side, there's some things there that need to be buttoned up. Particularly in terms of the customers and really a 360 view of the customer. So while those things are going on, it's still something that is not what you would see in another jurisdiction like here in Connecticut, right? We have our database, we're able to use our database for digital and be able to, drive traffic both, from the casino to digital, and then vice versa. Because the way that we're set up, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, is, digital is an extension of retail. The whole idea of bringing players into retail, get them onto the digital side, and then bring them back into retail is really what the Mohegan properties are doing, and particularly Fallsview. But then when it gets down to the different ways of how the Ontario market has been putting out the information to get through licensing. I know they've been doing the best that they can. And I think this past Friday, we saw the last of the policies and we saw the agreement that was pushed over, and that's all great news for us to move forward. But I think, with all of that going on, and with the challenges of having really the gray market players that are existing. And I'll put into two categories. There are those who have existed in Ontario right now who have licenses in the US that will go into the regulated market. And then there's those who really don't have the desire necessarily to go into a regulated market, and how do we make it fair for everybody, not just casino operators now who are going into digital, but those who are, putting a lot of time, effort, and money into the Ontario market to build Canadian companies to go into legitimate, and regulated market. So that in and of itself brings another level of challenges as an operator, as how is the province going to manage that? So I'll stop right now and let the conversation continue. Then I'm sure I'll pop back in with other thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think enforcement is obviously necessary, and we have yet to see how that's going to look like. So to be continued on that point. Charmaine?
I agree. Enforcement should follow once proper regulation is set up, and once you want to get those licenses, having a healthy competition on the online environment within the market. I would dare say challenges rather than hurdles, where I'm coming from, and that challenge is two practical examples: is us as suppliers and our relationship, if you like, vis-a-vis IGO, and then the practical realities of navigating between IGO and the AGCO. And I said, because as suppliers, we have no direct access and no direct communication with the IGO. Yet a lot of those discussions, those policy documents, those draft, a lot of what's in there has relevance for suppliers. So there's an issue of being able to timely get into that debate, or if you're a supplier and you might be discussing with multiple operators who might be interested in the market, you end up having the same discussion over and again. You might be trying to give feedback, and you're giving that feedback multiple times at the same time as the same feedback landing on IGO's desk, who I'm sure are quite busy right now. And we'd want to be able to, as suppliers, contribute. We have experience, we operate in regulated markets globally, and we've gone through licensing processes, albeit of course every market is different. So we'd like to be able to share that, and not perhaps only comment when you're talking about a draft document or a draft policy document, just be part and parcel of. So whether you replicate a little bit what happens in other markets, like formal working groups or unofficial sort of dialogue between a number of parties, that's something that we would welcome, being there at the table to contribute to the debate. As I've said earlier on, it's like, no market is right day one. There's always improvements going on, but you'd like to be part and parcel of those improvements. On the other hand, there's the issue between the IGO and the AGCO. Perhaps at the moment, and granted, listen, this is a new setup in a way for many of us, is to smoothen, on the one hand, gaps, on the one hand, overlaps when you're discussing and going forward, not just now, because we do find ourselves sometimes going around in a bit of loops around the same issues when you have questions. So I think that is something that can be improved. I mean, definitely we welcome the dialogue we have with the AGCO. They've been open. We've been able to share our experience, showcase what we're talking about, whether it's a product, etc. And that is something that really works. And I'm quite sure that down the line these challenges will be improved actually.
And I just want to jump back in because I agree with that. And I want to be, they're doing a lot at IGO and OLG, the AGCO. I mean, we're just coming out of another lockdown of the casino. I think on the 30th, we're about open again. And they've just been devastated up there, from a casino perspective and from the regulatory perspective, that they've got a lot on their plate. They're dealing with a lot of things up there. This is really, really important to us. And they've got a lot of other important things to the province of Ontario. So I don't want this to come across as anything other than really just more pointing out, just the challenges, but how we're working with the groups to make sure that we get these over the line. And, but I just want to make sure that, we're not going
that's
down.
why I said challenges, not hurdles.
Exactly.
And I just said, like, it's a practical example, but, as I said, I'm sure that these things get ironed out as you go along. It's not the first
and we want to
time.
make this right the first time, right? I think in the last panel they were talking about Tennessee. We don't want to be what Tennessee went through early on when they went live. They had some real challenges with an operator and other things in the state, and we don't want that to happen here.
Charmaine, you touched on a point about Playtech and it having experience and it being established across jurisdictions, and it's still facing certain challenges. So based on the complexity you're seeing in the market, how do you think new entrants without jurisdictional experience that are interested in being part of Ontario will find all of these requirements?
Challenging. No, listen, I'm joking. No, there's no one uniform model out there at the end of the day, right? When you talk about online licensing, whether it's tax licensing, whether they're capped, whether it's product, this is allowed, this isn't allowed. There's no one model. That's, I think, is a starting point from my point of view. And secondly, every single market has its own complexities, whether it's legal, technical, political realities. We face these in many jurisdictions. We're still facing them. You try to enter into discussions early on to feed into that process. So we do respect that there is that. And of course, having those two authorities in Ontario, it's new to many of us, as I've said. I think, again, complexity, yes, but our experience is that even where regulations are similar, and again, we know that there are many regulations that are similar, you still need to adjust to each jurisdiction because the interpretation of those can differ regardless how similar, or the expectations can differ as well, whether you're just baseline complying with those requirements or whether you're actually trying to raise those standards and have a higher bar. And I think, again, one thing I say is that the possibility to engage with the authorities in Ontario, and you can, especially if you're an operator, I would say make use of that. And, you can have rules-based approaches or you can have a risk-based approach. Here we have more of a risk-based approach. Some might say like, oh, but I want to go with a question and answer approach. It's the easy way out, if you like. You make use of that opportunity to engage and to give your understanding, your interpretation of how that requirement can pan out. I think you'll find that those at the other end are ready to listen and they're ready to absorb that information. I think that's a plus to be used. So regardless how complex the reality is for all of us, you can make use of that to have those discussions and share what you think is the way forward. I suppose the other thing that to keep in mind is that yes, there are high standards. I think there are high expectations. It's not a new market per se. And I should say, keep in mind that there's actually flexibility to revisit those AGCO, at least standards, as you go along. Don't lose sight of that, so don't do just the bare minimum. And one experience, if you like, taking the European regulatory trends and all the backlashes and restrictions we've been seeing there, I say keep that in mind when you're having your discussions with the regulatory authorities. As I think Rich has said, they're quite busy. So, all of us might be sending emails and reminders and what have you, like, why haven't I got a reply yet? I think we should appreciate a bit that they are trying. And in my view, I can only talk about the AGCO because that's my direct access, and trying really to the best they can in replying. And where they know, they reply immediately. Where they don't, I think is where the opportunity is to say, like, listen, may I share this? And perhaps one other point is, at least what we have done is we've joined the Canadian Gaming Association, because or at least I like to say, it's good when you are trying to collaborate to try to group your views, at least on key items when you're approaching the authorities, because ultimately what happens is that they end up with multiple examples or best examples of the way to go. Yet when you have an authority representing those views, you're helping them formulate a view and have a bit more evidence-based approaches in how they move forward.
Thanks. I agree that there are definitely some challenges, but I think the authorities have been doing a great job in keeping an open dialogue for any questions or commentary on any documents that have been released. I just want to shift focus a bit to you, Rich, and you being in the position of a land-based operator. You have an interesting view into the relationship between land and online. How is Fallsview going to create that omni-channel experience between online and in-person retail?
You know, the way that we've looked at it here at Mohegan Digital is really use the brands that we have as the key driver in our digital business. So just looking at Connecticut as an example, you know, the brand name of Mohegan in Connecticut is very, very strong. And so, you know, we've used that as a way to, you know, drive traffic, you know, to the casino, for experiences, to download the app, activate them on property. You know, we get a lot of people here every day at Mohegan Sun, and it's a way for us to use our best experiences to bring people into the app. And it's the same way for Fallsview. You know, Fallsview has had a great name. They've been the leading, you know, destination casino for decades, and using that same approach. You know, we're not going at it like this is going to be a Mohegan app. It's the Fallsview app is what we'll play Fallsview, and using the brand and really using the digital as an extension, as I mentioned before, of retail. You know, when you're on property, you're playing. When you leave, we want you to have Fallsview in your pocket. When you leave, you know, when you leave the property, you're engaging with the brand, you're driving reward points that bring you back to the property. So it's really, that's the omni-channel we look at. Is it digital, is the extension of retail, and it's build the best experiences from both. And we also feel that, you know, as a destination in Ontario, you know, we are bringing in, you know, our best customers, our best patrons, and giving them that experience. And I mean, it's really simple, but it really is coordinating, you know, the retail team with the digital team to provide that experience is what is exciting about entering the market.
And I think people are really excited about that component. So I've heard, so definitely something to look forward to. Shruti, I want to shift to what some call the backbone of the gaming industry, the payment space, critically important part of the online gaming ecosystem and customer experience. We've heard that one of the key priorities for customers is getting money in and out very quickly. And Paramount Commerce has been involved in the sector for some time now, supporting iGaming merchants. So what insights can you share in terms of elements that are critical as part of the sports betting or iGaming experience for players?
Sure. So as you mentioned, instant deposits and withdrawals are critical to both acquiring new customers and also driving loyalty to keep existing customers. They're both the first hurdle to becoming an active customer and the last touch point with an operator as they collect their winnings. So and when it comes to sports betting particularly, I would also say there's an inherent time sensitive nature. So having these transactions not only deposit instantly, but also clear in real time is just as important. And on top of all of that, all of these features, they also allow players to place bets on evenings and weekends and holidays. So really for all of these reasons, instant deposits and withdrawals are absolutely one of the most critical elements of the experience for players when it comes to payments. I would say the other critical feature is having a one-click deposit experience. Players really want the experience to be as seamless as possible, which means a clean interface, user interface, not having to kind of click in and click out, log into their banking, or really switch screens for any reason. So one-click experience like what we offer that allows players to place bets and stay in the game without really missing any of the action is also really critical.
Great. So I would say that I think the payments experience from the consumer standpoint has to be seamless without a doubt. But from a regulatory standpoint, I would say that there are responsible gambling initiatives that need to be in place, of course, by the operator, but are also typical of payments companies. With the payments lens, what tools do you use to ensure that responsible gambling measures are enhanced for operator clients while at the same time keeping in mind that seamless experience for the customer?
Right. So while most of the obligations of responsible gaming features are at the disposal of the operators, we offer tools to our operators to manage end user limits, which would include providing the operator with the ability to create different tiers or buckets, if you will, with varying limits for different players in an effort to promote responsible gaming. That said, I think as gaming matures across North America, we'll start to see kind of tighter restrictions that support players with respect to payments, perhaps by way of restrictions being placed on certain types of payments. So I can say at Paramount Commerce, we offer account-based payment solutions, which inherently support responsible gaming measures since players can't use any credit or borrowed funds to gamble. However, we are already starting to see some banks reject credit transactions, which could prompt some regulatory change in the near future as the industry continues to grow.
Yeah, and we've actually seen that in a couple other jurisdictions. I'm sure, Charmaine, you're very familiar with the certain agencies not allowing the use of credit cards for obvious reasons when it comes to RG. Are there any final comments on Ontario before I shift to the rest of Canada that also has an interest in iGaming?
There's always more comments, but no, I think from the perspective that, where we're at, we're excited about, this, we are here excited about the opportunity, the sooner the better to open. But as I said, and certainly before an election would be great, because that uncertainty nobody ever wants to really go through, but also that there is the time to get everything done right the first time. And I think, from our end, that's really the key.
Yeah, I would say it's really important to create an exciting launch and do it properly so that customers get that great experience the first time around, as opposed to it not being as great as it otherwise should be. Yeah. Charmaine, did you want to add something?
No, I said I concur wholeheartedly.
Wonderful. So I want to shift our focus to the rest of Canada. There are other provinces that have their sights set on the iGaming market, whether through RFPs or considering an open market compared to the traditional monopoly. Rich, do you think that as the market expands across Canada and iGaming and sports betting become part of the everyday vernacular, that we'll start to see different types of players? Obviously, we know there's a kind of typical player, whether it's different age mixes, female sports bettors, and so on.
So I'm going to go back to Ontario to answer this question just for a second. So, at our two casinos in Niagara, we have two venues at the casinos, one that's 1,500 seats and a new one that was built 5,000 seats. And, I come from the video game world before the gaming world for about 20 years. So with Atari, Hasbro, Viacom, and from the Atari days, we had the different tournaments back in the day when it came to video games, and the esports model is one that we are focused on for Ontario. It's been a very strong esports province. We plan on using those venues to host esports tournaments and other things around esports. And what we're finding in certain states in the US is that that's a more younger demo that is, whether they're betting on sports or table games, or even a more female demo that's betting on slot games. That's where we see the expansion. In fact, our VP of marketing here, she is one of the leading experts in esports throughout, North America. And, she's bringing that particular understanding to the gaming market. And it's worked out extremely well for us here in Connecticut. And we see that going to happen in Ontario too. So that's going to be an expansion. Now it's going to take time, right? Because esports really doesn't have the necessary protocols built in that we see in the other major sports, but over time that will be something that we will be aware of. As far as the other provinces, I think that's it's really hard for us to talk about, in particular, where we see our business as how we are working with our land-based operations. So we're going to look at the rest of Canada as how would we enter a market? What does the marketplace look like? How do we use our brand names that we have to make it an entry point for us? But I think to the particular question that you asked, it will grow. The marketplace. We will bring in a younger demo. We're already seeing that in Connecticut, and we will bring in other sports and in due time, things like esports.
Great, thank you. Charmaine and Shruti, as we see the sort of the expansion of iGaming across the country in terms of your respective businesses, is there anything in particular you're most looking forward to with the potential expansion? Charmaine, I'll start with you.
I think a bit like what Rich said, it's difficult to pick one or talk about one province or another. I think in general, what you see is, many countries, regions, continents have moved to regulate for online. And what you see is that generally there is an extra spillover effect. So of course, something is going to happen. Now that said, even if you look at Latin market, if you look at Argentina itself, if you look at Europe, different European markets, if you look at Germany, they all sort of tend to go their own way in what model they choose, and you have to be appreciative of the local specifics. As an industry as a whole, I would say when you're advocating for any regulatory changes or you're trying to get in early on in those debates, I mean, that's my role to go and share my personal regulatory experience, my background, but also Playtech's experience in working across markets, but doing that within the appreciation of the specifics, the local, as we said, and political realities. You look for those business opportunities under the right conditions, and we would welcome any workable framework. But that said, I can be in Playtech, can be on a market, and it can be supplying a market. But if there's huge leakage in a market, at the end of the day, no one is benefiting except those that are not really paying taxes and meeting those local requirements. So there are a couple of points that you'd hope that would be considered if other provinces would be looking at Ontario or elsewhere and looking to regulate in any way, if you like, or open up their market or expand for online. One other thing is that what we would sort of say is that there's no need to always duplicate all those rules. You don't need to reinvent the wheel, though you do, of course, have your own right to how you regulate, but you don't have to add your own local flavors all the time, because there's a lot out there that is tried and tested. And the other point I would make is I alluded to our GM and Ontario having high standards, and that is for Playtech a global commitment that we have committed to really put the focus on protection of players. There's today the use of AI and technology that allows us to focus on players at the individual level rather than blanket measures. And I say that because what I would welcome and what I would hope would happen in other provinces looking to do something similar, not to Ontario, is broad stakeholder engagement early on in the process. And by that, I don't mean suppliers or just suppliers and operators. I mean, whether it's academia, whether it's researchers, whether it's media companies, all those that form part and parcel of that ecosystem. And that is important in my view, so that in any line you decide to take down the line, you're being guided by evidence in what you put out there. And being guided by evidence means that you're putting a framework which has a more solid base on which to move forward, and that's how you attract investment to the market, and that's how the players come on shore. So it all feeds into a same process. So whichever province moves forward in whatever way, of course, we'd like to be part of that process early on.
Just before Shruti answers this question, Charmaine, I just want to ask you a follow-up. Is there any particular jurisdiction that you view as really a model, aside from Ontario, where the other provinces can look to Ontario? Are there any jurisdictions outside of Canada, whether it's the US, Europe, et cetera, that you think is really the model that we can look to for some guidance? Where you've seen
in terms of, in terms of, as I said, there's no one uniform model, but in terms of how the framework is working, I think Denmark sets a very good example. I don't think because we all say it's perfect in every single way, but because there's a framework, you can actually engage, and there is ongoing engagement possibly with the regulatory authorities, both as suppliers, both as operators, and that has been ongoing. I think there has been a willingness to listen and to see what's out there, and to make, ultimately you're the regulator. You have to make work the rules that are given to you by those that have adopted them. So you're by your political masters, if you like, but they have tried their best to make that work. And so far, I think it's working properly. And again, I would add, just because I dare add, I say that just because that market is working properly doesn't mean that you shouldn't be sort of paying attention how you are behaving as an industry on the market. Because just as markets spill over when markets are looking to open up, restrictions which kick in other markets, or public and media opinion can equally have a spillover effect. And I think, again, as an industry, we should also be always conscious of that. But definitely Denmark, and I'm okay, the UK is going through a couple of changes. Now it's quite a mature market, but it's functioning. I mean, we all revisit regulations if you like, but it's also been a market that has worked quite well for the industry and for players. There's choice and there's protection on the market. So yeah.
Great, thanks. Shruti?
Sure. So I think as a payments services company, what we're really looking forward to is just the influx of merchants into the market. We're seeing that a lot of the new regulations are creating more competition and bringing more operators into the market. We've already seen this in Ontario, where over the last 12 or so months, we've seen a lot of interest and anticipation of the regulated market. So we're really looking forward to supporting some of the large US and European operators as they look to enter the Canadian market, particularly Ontario.
And we're going to continue, I think, to see a lot of that happening. I do want to flip it to Q&A shortly. Zoltan, I don't know if I'm going to be able to see those questions if you'll relay them to me, but one concluding question that I have for each one of the speakers is, if you could look forward into time, let's say 5 to 10 years from now, what are your hopes for the iGaming market in Canada, regardless of province, from whichever perspective you choose, whether it's consumer or regulatory, et cetera? I'll start with you, Rich.
In looking what, seeing what Charmaine said, I would look at New Jersey over the next 5 years, being closer to home and not knowing Denmark. If Ontario can evolve, to what New Jersey has become in its first 5 years and 7 years in terms of, the revenues that they've produced for the state, but also the responsible gaming, the problem gambling measures that they've put in place in the state. I think that's something that, 5 years from now, if Ontario is hitting all of those things, I think that will open up the market for the rest of Canada, and not knowing where each of the other provinces are. And I think they're on the right track to do that. They're certainly putting all the measures in place that they've seen from other jurisdictions to make sure that they're doing it, the right way from their perspective, but also be open to discussions in terms of, how the market's evolving and working with the operators to make sure that it's providing exactly what the government's looking for. And this is tax dollars for them and safe responsible gaming for their constituents.
Thank you. Charmaine?
Yeah, I'm trying to see which one to pick. Yeah, Richard, you put forward quite a few interesting points. I mean, yes, where would I want to be? Where would I want to see the industry moving in a couple of years' times? I think those opportunities to engage fact finding early on, I think, are quite key, rather than lifting and saying like, oh, this is how this particular province or country or jurisdiction, what have you, has regulated. So that, and policymakers being willing to listen. And I think that also actually ties in with where the industry, in my view, should be in a couple of years' time, which is, we keep talking about responsible gambling, but having responsible gambling, having protection of players really as part and parcel of our business across a wide plethora of the industry, more and more, and keeping sort of both the protection of players as well as gambling fun as two key elements, and not because the rules are telling us to do that, but because that is where we as an industry feel that we should be.
Thank you. And over to Shruti.
I mean, I think Richard and Charmaine really got all the key points there. Personally, like I've been reading a lot about the Ontario market in particular. I know that there are some projections that it's projected to be one of the largest online gaming markets in North America, alongside New Jersey, Pennsylvania in the next few years, and hit just under $2 billion in gross revenue by 2026. So my hope would really be that we hit these projections, hopefully beat them by quite a bit, and that the other provinces and territories, as they continue to regulate, have an equal amount of success. That being said, when it comes to payments, I think it's all about choice and payment providers that allow players to continue to pay how and when they want will be really critical. And we're constantly improving the experience for players, and I think new payment options are probably also just around the corner, possibly by way of cryptocurrency as they continue to gain popularity. I think an operator that might allow deposits or withdrawals using crypto could have a real advantage in terms of player acquisition.
I think we're all very hopeful that it'll be the case that Ontario will exceed those numbers, yet to be determined, and definitely the payment options are a priority for many operators. I can say that on my behalf. Thank you for the commentary, very much appreciated. I just want to turn it over to the Q&A that I'm receiving here before I get to some concluding remarks. One of the questions that came in here, and I'm just going to reword it a bit. Do any of you think that the self-exclusion programs that will eventually be in place for operators will drive more players to become self-aware of playing habits?
Who's going first?
Become more self-aware. What responsible gaming allows us to do is to message out to the populace that there are places where they can get help. They can self-exclude themselves. When you're working in a gray market where government's not involved, you don't get those responsible gaming opportunities to reach those customers. And we've seen that across every state. You'll find states that launch. You'll get comments, oh, our calls to the hotline have gone up, 50%, 100%, 200%. Yeah, it's working. Because when you give someone the opportunity, when you put an opportunity out there for people to use a service, you want them to use it. And Ontario's been a great market for so long. I can probably guarantee the majority of people who are playing in a great market don't know that there is a responsible gaming service in Ontario. And so I think from that perspective, I'm not sure about the self-aware perspective, but I think the awareness of a responsible gaming program will become heightened, because part of the regulations will be for every operator to put a percentage of their revenues towards responsible gaming.
Yep, and I think Ontario has also done a very good job of putting in RG requirements for operators, whether it's a loss limit, whether it's restrictions on marketing and advertising as they relate to RG. So I think the controls are definitely in place when it comes to responsible gambling. Any final comments on this question? Thank you. Zoltan, do I have any other questions that came in? I only see this one.
Nope.
I'm not seeing anything. Okay, wonderful. So that concludes our panel. Big thanks to everyone for joining us today. Great appreciation for the speakers who offer their time to provide their insights. Last but certainly not least, round of applause to Zoltan and Team Gaming Americas for organizing our panel and all the other ones. I look forward to our next Canadian gaming industry updates panel.
Yes.
Over to you, Zoltan.
Thank you guys. Thank you, Rich.
Thank you,
Charmaine, Shruti, Chantal. April 19 is the next episode of your Canadian update. Thank you so much.